Islam, a religion that encourages inquisitiveness, questioning and rational thinking, from the bustling intellectual capitals of classical Baghdad and Cordoba to the contemporary debates within Muslim communities worldwide. A persistent question echoes: does Islam, as a faith system and philosophical tradition, permit or even encourage its adherents to ask fundamental questions about life, its objectives, and the nature of existence? A superficial reading of religious texts or a focus on modern fundamentalist discourses might suggest a tradition of dogmatic prescription. However, a deep historical and textual analysis reveals a far more nuanced reality. Islamic tradition, in its philosophical, theological, and even foundational scriptural dimensions, not only allows for questioning but often positions the act of profound inquiry, nazar, bahth, istifsar, as a sacred imperative, a pathway to spiritual and intellectual certainty. The very cornerstone of Islamic belief, the declaration of faith, shahada, is itself a response to a fundamental existential question. The Quran does not begin with a blunt imposition of dogma. Rather, it repeatedly invokes the human capacity for reflection as the means to attain belief. Verses incessantly call upon people to reflect on the creation of the heavens and the earth, Quran 3:191, to travel through the earth and observe Quran 29:20, and to use their akl intellect, reason to discern signs ayat, in the universe and within themselves. The objective of life, as presented in the Quran, is explicitly tied to this cognitive faculty. I did not create the jinn and mankind, except to worship me, Quran 51:56. Classical exegetes, like Al-Ghazali and Ibn Ashur, have extensively argued that this worship ibadah is not merely ritualistic, but encompasses knowing God, which necessitates contemplation, inquiry, and the use of reason to understand His creation and His will. Therefore, the primary objective worship through knowledge is intrinsically linked to a questioning engagement with reality. This scriptural encouragement blossomed into a formidable tradition of Islamic philosophy, falsafa, and scholastic theology. Al-Kalam, the Mutazilit school, emerging in the 8th century, famously championed the primacy of reason. They held that ethical truths are accessible to human intellect independent of revelation, and that scripture must be interpreted through a rational lens. Their theological project was built upon rigorous questioning and debate, employing Greek logical tools to formulate sophisticated arguments about divine unity, tawhid, and justice. Adl. The Mutazites were an influential Islamic theological school that emerged in the early 8th century CE, primarily in Basra and Baghdad. They are known for emphasizing reason, rationalism, and the use of logic in interpreting religious texts. Central to their doctrine were 5 core principles: the unity and justice of God, human free will, the promise and threat of divine reward and punishment, the intermediate status of a grave sinner, neither believer nor unbeliever, and the obligation to command good and forbid evil. The Mutazilites effectively faded by the 10th century. Their legacy endures in debates about reason, revelation, and justice in Islamic thought. While their political influence waned, their methodological legacy endured. The Asharite school, often seen as their opponents, did not reject reason, but sought to delineate its boundaries, engaging with the same complex questions about causality, free will, and the nature of divine attributes through elaborate dialectical reasoning. Kalam was, by definition, a discourse of questioning and disputation. The pinnacle of Islamic philosophical inquiry is embodied in figures like Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, Avicenna, and Ibn Rushd. Their work was a grand project of questioning the nature of existence, the relationship between necessity and contingency, the active intellect, and the path to human flourishing. Sayyid Ibn Sina's Floating Man thought experiment is a quintessential example of using radical introspection to question the source of self-awareness and, by extension, the nature of the soul and its connection to the divine. Ibn Rushd's robust defense of philosophy in the decisive treatise argued that philosophical demonstration, burhan, was not only permissible for the intellectual elite, but was the highest form of comprehending truths that Scripture presents in allegorical form. For these thinkers, questioning was not heresy. It was the duty of those endowed with the capacity for reason to pursue certainty yakin through intellectual rigor. Their objective of life was the actualization of the human rational soul, aligning it with the active intellect, thereby achieving a state of perpetual philosophical and spiritual enlightenment. Perhaps the most compelling personal journey of questioning is that of Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali, died 1111. In his intellectual autobiography, Deliverance from Error, he meticulously documents a profound crisis of doubt that paralyzed him. Questioning the very foundations of knowledge, sense, perception, intellectual axioms, and even transmitted dogma, his skeptical illness was not condemned but presented as a necessary purgatory on the path to truth. Ghazali's resolution, a synthesis of reasoned theology, moderated philosophy, and Sufi experiential knowledge, mifa, became a paradigmatic model for Sunni Islam. It validated the journey of the questioner, showing that sincere doubt, if pursued with intellectual honesty and spiritual purpose, could lead to a more resilient and profound faith. The objective of life, for Ghazali, became the purification of the heart. To truly know God, a goal reached only after traversing the valley of questioning. In the realm of practical and legal philosophy, the tradition of ijtihad, independent juristic reasoning, institutionalized questioning. Faced with novel situations not explicitly addressed in primary texts, scholars were obliged to use reasoned inquiry, qiyas istisan, maslaha, to derive rulings. This process acknowledged that life's complexities required an ongoing, interrogative engagement with divine sources to discern objectives. Maqasid of the Sharia, the preservation of faith, life, intellect, lineage, and property. The work of scholars like al-Shatabi on Maqasid al-Shari' explicitly frames Islamic law as a teleological system aimed at human welfare, a purpose discovered through continuous scholarly investigation and debate about the spirit of the law. Of course, this invitation to inquiry has historically operated within boundaries. Questions aimed at mocking core tenets, iman, or destabilizing social order were contested. The tension between haq or yaqin, certain truths of faith, and the free reign of doubt was always managed, not abolished. Yet, the predominant classical tradition distinguished between kufr, disbelief, and shak, doubt, often treating the latter as a stage in intellectual development. The fear of fitna, discord, sometimes led political and religious authorities to restrict certain lines of questioning, but this was a social-political constraint, not an inherent theological prohibition against the intellectual act itself. In conclusion, to ask whether Islam allows questions about life and its objectives is to overlook the vibrant intellectual history the tradition has fostered. From the Quranic imperative to ponder creation, through the dialectical halls of Kalam, the metaphysical explorations of the Falasifa, the personal skepticism of Al-Ghazali, to the juristic ijtihad, Islamic civilization has cultivated a rich culture of questioning. The objective of life worship through knowledge, the actualization of the intellect, the purification of the heart, is not a closed answer but a dynamic quest. It is a quest that employs revelation as a guiding light, but one that recognizes reason as the indispensable faculty for navigating the path. To be a Muslim, in the fullest philosophical sense, is to be a perpetual seeker, talib al-ilm, for whom asking why isn't a permission to question, but to rediscover and reinvigorate this deeply embedded, yet often neglected, heritage of sacred inquiry.